Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone is having a good day and a good week. Today is something that I think is pretty interesting. How to be a man, a thumbnail guide. There's a lot of talk about what it is to be a man and what you shouldn't do as a man. I'm going to give some of my viewpoints. This is only a thumbnail guide. Obviously, if you want to look at it in depth, you want to do a little bit more research, check out my website for a few recommended links. But here's a question. So, if you want to become a man, do you need to just happen upon it by accident, or do you need to be intentional about it? Okay, I assume that it's intentional, right? But what does that mean? How can you be intentional about something unless you have an idea? Okay, and ideas don't just spring out of nowhere. You get the ideas from something. Okay, so this is a cultural thing, things that we pass down from generation to generation. Now, what does it mean to be a man? So that's the question. Now, here's some assumptions. It's not accidental. You don't just become a great person on accident. I would argue that it's very hard. Okay. Now, since we have to be intentional, okay, we have to have an idea, and that's the reason why we're discussing it right now. And from the previous videos, I've suggested that not only do you try to formulate your ideas to yourself, but you try to formulate and share those ideas. It exposes yourself to public scrutiny. It helps you to condense your thoughts. And when you're talking about being a man, this is actually very important because, like in business, they have things called an elevator speech. An elevator speech is basically what can you pitch your company, your product, or your service to a person in basically a very, very short amount of time. Now, here's the idea. If you can't give a quick explanation of what do you believe, what you sell, what you're about, well, what does that mean? Then maybe you don't even have an idea yourself, okay? So when you share your vision with somebody else, you are developing yourself as a leader. You're developing yourself morally and intellectually, assuming that you're wrestling with important things. Okay, so according to that idea, I am taking my own advice, and this could be a book. So there's obviously much more to say, but these I hope will be stimulating for you. Okay, 7 characteristics. The first one we already talked about was being intentional. Okay, when we're talking about becoming a certain type of person, you don't just happen upon it by accident. Some things that you can do is you find people that you admire and you ask questions. Why do you admire them? Are their characteristics genuinely admirable? Okay, so for instance, when you were young, sometimes you admire people, and it's not because you actually genuinely think that they're a great person, you just wanted to be them. Okay, but some people actually survive that scrutiny. Some people genuinely have admirable characteristics that it would be good for you to embody and to enact and to make into your habits. Okay, so be intentional. Okay, next thing is have a vision of life. Okay, I've mentioned this in my discussions of leadership. You need to have a vision. Okay, go back to that elevator speech. If you can't convey a vision to somebody else, then you're not a leader. Okay. Now, I'm working on the assumption that men are supposed to be some type of leaders. Now, I'm not going into like the discussion of gender roles and stuff. I believe everybody should be a leader. Okay, in some shape or form. And a leader doesn't mean that they're the highest on the hierarchy. It doesn't mean that they're, lording over other people. So I ascribe to servant leadership. So within your sphere, you're leading some place. The question is where are you leading yourself and others to? And it's not obvious. You need to discuss those things. What's the vision? Okay. The next characteristic, preparation. Now this is related to being intentional and having a vision. If you have a place to go, okay, and you're intentionally seeking it, you're going to take steps, actual concrete steps to get there. Okay. If you're going to build a life, you have a vision, you also have a place where you're at, you're going to be working towards that. So the ability to prepare and to work towards something, that's definitely a characteristic that we should think about as being a man. Okay, 4, commitment. Now, a person that can't commit to anything, what is that about? I mean, that's definitely something that we would expect for children, but as adults, that should be something that we look down on if you can't commit to something. And this applies to me too. Anytime I look in my life, if there's a lack of commitment, I should expose myself to that scrutiny. Think about what's going on here. If you can't commit to anything, that's a flaw. Okay. Reliability, similar. So if you are not reliable, what does that mean? You're not a stability point. Okay. And if you're not stable, if you're not reliable, then you can't be a leader. Okay. Honesty. Okay. Honesty and integrity, these are obviously very important. And this, I don't think this is just a list of things that I think are really good. Um, they're essential in the sense that if you lack these things, it would be appropriate to say, are you acting like a man at all? That is to say, if you're lacking something, it would be an appropriate question to say something like, well, if they're not reliable, they can't commit to anything. Is this person a child? Which means they have not passed from being a child to being an adult. Okay. Now, I don't mean that a meaningless slur. It's a genuine question. If you can't do those things, are you an adult? Okay. So reliability, honesty. The last one is constructive, and that's related to the vision, but and the preparation. But the idea is that you are supposed to be building something. You're building a life, whether you have one day to live or 100 years to live. You should be about something. Okay. That doesn't mean that that's the only thing you do, but I believe that you're here on this planet to build something, to build a life. Maybe it's to build a career, maybe and have your priorities, and you have to understand what those priorities are. Okay. Now, maybe these things haven't been groundbreaking for you. So a lot of these things are very common in the sense that we all agree that we should be reliable and commitment. But I want to push past that to get to some other points that try to fill out my vision of what a man's supposed to be. Now, here are some asides that go along with this that help bring a little bit more context. Remember, I'm trying to do something that probably should take a whole book, but I like to try to condense it into something that is something you can see in the morning with your coffee. Okay, so here are some asides that help provide a little context. Okay, all of these characteristics takes a lot of time. Okay. Now, one of the important things about these characteristics is they take a long time to develop. And if you start developing them when you're 18, which would be like a legal age of adulthood, then in a way it's so late because you already have all of these bad habits. If you haven't been working on them in a specific, social scenario in a family, you're going to be behind because those people that have been that are able to work on those things and that have been given those things from their parents, you're going to be a bad leader because you're going to lack intention. You're not going to have a vision of life, or your vision of life is going to be very poor. Um, you don't know how to prepare long term. You don't know the meaning of commitment. You're not going to be reliable. You don't see that that's a virtue that is a part of the threshold of being an adult. Honesty, that's something. It's kind of like if you don't value honesty, then you don't see why it's so important. But if you do see it, it's just so obviously important. That doesn't clarify things exactly, but just to say that there's certain values that you have, and you only get a taste of it when you practice it and become a part of it. Okay, so they take a long time. You need to be intentional about it. Okay. Every man is an example of what it means to be a man, whether or not they're doing a good job. So, for instance, you are being an example, okay? Whether it's good or bad, you are influencing people for the good or for evil. So we need to be more intentional about that, okay? Now, another aside, this may sound crazy, but we should try to get all of our children past the threshold of adulthood basically in their teenage years. And that may sound like, well, that's too high. But I fear that we are actually living in a culture that in a way our standards have slipped a little. And I don't want this to be just this kind of like lamenting of the good old days. I don't want to say that exactly. But there's specific things about this time period that we no longer have the natural limitations. We have poverty, finite resources. We didn't have technology to give us so much access to information. We had things set up so that we had to develop certain virtues just to get by in life. But a lot of those necessities have been taken away, so we're just stuck with the culture that we have. Now, what I mean to say is, I have a story. My wife has a grandfather, and he has a story that when he was in the Depression, so he's 94. Um, at 5 years old, it was his job to take his fishing pole and go down to the stream and to bring fish home for the family. And literally, very often, if he didn't bring the fish home, they wouldn't eat. Okay, think about that's 5 years old. Now, contrast this with something that is actually relatively new in the last year or two, where they were psychologists, the developmental psychologists have actually had to add a new term, and it's called delayed adolescence. Okay, like some people literally aren't becoming what we call quote unquote adults until 25. Okay, so think about that. Our expectation of becoming an adult is getting really bad, and part of it is because we look around, like, oh well, the neighbor does this or your cousin does this, but we need to look at things in a broader scope in the sense of what are human beings capable of? What thresholds do we need to get to? You know, so it does sound crazy to think that a 12 or 14-year-old person, or roughly around the age of accountability, would be an adult. Okay. Now, and maybe there's some reasons to say, well, maybe their brain isn't developed, stuff like that. But as a parent, we should be thinking about what's our end goal. Kind of like if you're a teacher, you need to know what the exams are so that you could build your courses to fit in, so that the assessment and the teaching mesh together. As a parent, if you don't have an end goal, then how do you know what you're working towards? And if it's just like, well, I don't want them to be addicted to drugs, and I want them to pass, high school, and I want them to get in college and not be a terrible person. Like that's too low. Those bars, I mean, obviously those things should be included in your plan, but then you need to have a much higher bar, a higher vision, because they do ask. I only have a 4-year-old, but she asks brilliant questions all the time. What's life about? What is this person? What is that person? Why do we do this? Children ask really great questions, and if you don't have an answer, and it's kind of like, I don't know, they'll figure it out. That's sad. You're failing in the idea of giving them a vision of life, and they're not going to be able to formulate their vision of life. They're not going to wrestle with philosophy. Read a bunch of stuff, then go back in time and give it to themselves. If you don't give them a vision of life, you are setting them up for a failure. Okay. Is it insurmountable failure? No. Some people can overcome those things. So, but why am I wearing a flash shirt? Well, so exemplars, Aristotle, thousands of years ago, talked about how to develop virtue, and one of the things is to have heroes in view. You are a hero to every child that sees you. You are an embodiment of what it is to be a man. Or a woman, whatever you are. Now, whatever you are an embodiment of whatever that is to children. But you're also influencing yourself too. So if you don't think in a heroic, high vision sense, well, you're not going to be working towards that. Okay, and you're not going to become a great person on accident. It takes a lot of work. Okay, and you have to put up with failure. You have to have justification for why aren't you giving up? Because other people are giving up. Other people are having different standards. Why should you have a higher bar standard than other people? Okay. So this is explained more fully in my article. See the link attached, commonphilosopher.com. But one thing is here's one thing that you could try to put this in a nutshell. Think of the ideal father and husband for a man. Okay, what's the ideal father and husband? Now, in potential, I'm not saying you actually have to be a father or husband, okay? But in potential, you should be able to be a father and husband roughly around the time that you would become a quote-unquote adult. So is that 12 years old, 15 years old, 18 years old? I don't know. But if you think that that's the standard, like this is the bar between going from a child to being an adult, if you have a threshold like that, that is going to really help you understand what you're trying to do. So for instance, I have a daughter, I don't have a son, but I am trying to be a person that when she looks at other people, she can say, well, what does my dad act like? Okay, because he's the standard. So at least as good as my dad. Okay, now, I'm not saying that I'm a paragon or anything like that, but this is the way that I'm trying to think of these things. So when my daughter sees me, she's also going to see a potential boyfriend and husband. When she sees me, she sees what fathers are supposed to be like. And it doesn't matter if I do a good job or bad job. I am going to be that example, and that's a very, very weighty responsibility. And it's not going to get taken care of just by, well, as long as I don't do horrible. Okay, it's like the Hitler test. As long as I'm not Hitler, then I'm okay. Like, that's too low. That's too low of a bar. Okay, so if you wanted to take away one thing, just to basically be as a nutshell, think of being able, once you become an adult, to being an ideal father and husband. Okay, so that, if you thought about that, that could help crystallize and to make concrete what you're trying to do. So if you have a son, are they, once they become an adult, whatever age that is, are they going to understand what it means to be a man? Okay, so I made a list. This isn't a comprehensive list, but these are some starting points. Okay, and if they know what that concept is, hey, this is the basic minimum of being a man. Even that's not a great man. This isn't a saint. This isn't a heroic standard. This is just basic. Okay, we need to have an idea of what the basic is. Okay, we need to have an idea of what the basic vision is like. Hey, men do this, and when they don't do that, they are not acting like true men. Okay, so and I think that's right. If you're not even an honest person, what type of man are you? You know, if you can't even be faithful to your wife, what are you doing? You know, this is basic minimum stuff. This isn't high bar stuff. This is just the basics. Okay, so be intentional. Think about what it means to be a man, and obviously this can be applied to what does it mean to be a woman. But one way that I'm trying to organize my thoughts in a very kind of boiled down version is think of an ideal. Okay, what would the ideal father and husband be? And think about those necessary characteristics and whether or not you're a father or husband at all. Okay, you may not do those things. It may not be part of God's plan for your life. That's fine. But the idea is you need to have an idea what that means and what's required. Because even if you're an uncle, even if you're a guy that is a worker of some kind, you are still an image of what we're supposed to be on this planet. In any case, okay. Thank you for listening. Hopefully this was stimulating. For a little bit more information, check out my website. Hope you guys have a great day. You know what? If you have a different idea, so respond. Send me a message. Send me an email. Check out my website. Comment there. Like I said in previous posts, just the fact of trying to articulate your thoughts and putting it out so that other people can scrutinize it is a step. So, and if you think that you have a better idea, awesome. If you think I'm wrong, well, tell me how I'm wrong and I'll correct my beliefs. That's the benefit of taking your ideas from a private thing in your closet to putting it into public and trying to help yourself and help others. So let me know if you've got a better idea. But thanks for listening. I hope everyone has a very concrete idea of what a man's supposed to be. You guys have a great week.